Well, it's a pleasure to see so many people here. My thinking prior to this was, I don't know of any raging controversies. The NCAA games are today. The ICO has its kind of celebration of its 50th. Music at the hotel, the Dolphin, and I thought, well, might be a little sparse. So my record stays perfect. I'm wrong again. Okay, so the format for today, we're going to start by letting each candidate have up to 10 minutes to kind of introduce themselves, tell you what's on their mind. And then, by the way, we drew numbers from a hat for this, and it came out 1, 2, 3 for everybody. 2 ones got the same person, one person got the 2 twos, and the other got 3 threes. So this is not rigged. It was a free and fair drawing. Anyway, so after they're finished, we're going to take some questions. At about 4, I believe, we're going to take a short break, about 10 minutes, and then we will come back and accept further questions. When that's done, each candidate will get up to 2 minutes to kind of summarize what they heard in the way of questions or what they wanted to say. It's kind of their concluding remarks. So, and then when that's done, we're going to have some coffee and cookies. I think coffee's there now, but the cookies were hiding out, so there'll be some left. So we'll have those when it's done, and you'll have a chance then to kind of meet and greet folks you might want to say hello to and get to know just a little better than sit up front kind of thing. So with that, yep, I think I covered all of my concerns for now. So in order of speaking, our first speaker, both times, is Amiel. No? This is hard. Something like that. That's my hearing aids, trust me. Okay. Karen, come on up.
So, good afternoon, and thank you. So thank you to the Forum Committee for hosting this event. I try never to talk about religion or politics or myself in public. However, you are here because you want to get a sense of who I am and what I believe in. So trust me, this is very uncomfortable for me. We drove through the Sea Ranch one day and stopped at the surf market for a sandwich. 2 weeks later, we owned a house to use part-time, and 1 year later, we were full-time residents. This story, or some version of it, is pretty typical here. There is magic in this place, and it's palpable. I have come to Sea Ranch by way of New York City and the Santa Cruz Mountains, 2 extremes, polar opposites. I love the ranch and want the inner workings of our community to be as aspirational as our day-to-day experience of the landscape and the wildlife. I love what Sea Ranch stands for, and I'm inspired by the original creative spirit and genius of Lawrence Halprin and the founding architectural team. I understand and appreciate the meaning and the value of the seaside Mars, and I believe in the insistence on maintaining a design and landscape philosophy. Another Sea Ranch will never happen again, and I feel blessed to live here and devote time to keeping the spirit alive and true. I want to tell you some of the areas that are of particular importance to me at the ranch and why I feel qualified to govern in these areas and in general. And they are not in any particular order of importance for me. Firstly, communication is a particular interest and concern of mine, and I learned at the town hall meeting last week that it is also of importance to the membership. We are a diverse community of full-time members, weekenders, and vacation rental owners. The workings of the community need to be transparent and equally responsive to each area of the membership. In-person communication between association staff and members, between committees and the board, between the board and the community, all matter. And how we communicate with one another affects the quality of our lives. Members' opinions matter and need to be voiced, heard, and acted upon respectfully and promptly. I would like to promote a format where everyone feels free and welcome to express their opinions and responses to an issue, both positive and negative, and is respected for their opinions. It is only in doing this that we can make progress on our original goal of being a utopian community. In the highest sense of the word, listening is the critical and decisive component to be able to make good decisions. This will make us a better community. It seems that Lawrence Halpern was a profound listener. I believe I have the skills to speak to communication in general at the Sea Ranch and specifically its website efforts. I took 2 years off from my art business in the height of the .com era to act as the head of all content development and marketing for artnet.com, the first serious and viable art site. I rewrote the Fine Art Auction database with web developers, which is now the gold standard for art auction price research, devised the first online auction for art, and the first online catalog resume platform. I also launched the first online fundraising art auction. I oversaw the redesign and navigation for the entire site. Many art sites have come and gone since, but ArtNet is still one of the most viable and certainly longest standing site in that space. Design and architecture at the Sea Ranch. I am passionate about design and architecture. I would like to see an easier, more efficient, more member-centric process in the area of design and review, and a clearer statement regarding the use of new, sustainable, fire-resistant materials in keeping with the original aesthetics of the ranch. Our weather is changing, and the risk of fire is clearly real, and we need to embrace change where we can and where appropriate. The design and review process could be kinder and more collaborative with members. Building or remodeling your home is a lengthy and highly stressful process. Maybe we can find good ways to improve the process and lessen the angst on the part of the members. I have spent an entire adult life in the worlds of art, design, and architecture. I have 2 higher-level degrees in my area. I own my own business, building collections for private individuals and corporate institutions. On a daily basis, I collaborate with architects, designers, lighting experts, contractors, and legal teams, realizing major site-specific permanent art installations. In the past couple of years, I've worked on projects in San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York, LA, Houston, Boston, and Denver. I manage teams of people who have one goal in mind: to create the best, most creative solution for the project, on time, on budget. In my personal life, I've designed and managed the renovation of every home I've lived in, both apartments and houses, and currently I'm in the middle of a full house remodel here at the Sea Ranch. I've had personal experience working with local architects, contractors, trades, and the design committee. I understand the process, and I'm intimate with the specifics of building at the Sea Ranch. Timber harvesting, dead and dying trees. The conflict over harvesting the redwood forest and the issue of dead and dying trees worry me greatly. In the Santa Cruz Mountains, I worked with one other neighbor to strategize and execute the buyout of the timber rights from the planned unit developer who had filed a THP with the state to cut 65% of the redwood forest on 160 common acres owned by our membership. We accomplished this by raising independent funds, over $200,000, which were matched dollar for dollar by the Semper Virens Fund, thereby buying out and expunging timber harvesting rights in perpetuity. This was the first such collaboration with an HOA for Semper Virens, and one I am very proud to have spearheaded. This entailed extensive interaction with CAL FIRE, the County of Santa Cruz, and the community. Due to this success, my colleague now serves on Semper Virens' board. We also manage these common acres in the face of the historic Martin Road and Lockheed fires in the area. We proactively worked with CAL FIRE and assigned HOA funds to the thinning of trees and maintaining the passability of our fire access roads. There was nothing like driving through the residue of the Martin fire every day to remind one of the importance of fire safety and forest management. We worked with the Rural Bonnie Doon Association on fire escape, critical services, and community communication. Sound fiscal management. Sound fiscal management is critical at the Sea Ranch. There are very few ways to raise funds except from the members, so it's incumbent on any board that it conducts business in a fiscally responsible way. I believe in clear procedures, assigned responsibilities, and stated goals. In my business, I'm required to assess a project's estimated cost even before I know the full details of the project, and then stay within budget and on time frame. No exceptions. I'm often surprised in the nonprofit world how little budgeting occurs at the outset of a project. My New York City board service was a baptism of fire at a historically difficult time in the city. We removed a corrupt board, we removed a corrupt building superintendent, we removed a corrupt managing agent. It is hard to believe when I look back on it now. I don't expect such problems here, but that's to say that I've never shied away from tackling difficult, almost impossible problems. We reinstated $250,000 stolen dollars from the funds of the HOA. I was requested to be an expert witness 10 years later, long after I had moved from the building, to testify before the Lower Manhattan Court. We won the case and the funds were reinstated to the HOA. Others on the board said we were never going to win. Too difficult. But I couldn't give up. As vice president of the Santa Cruz board, I worked with the board president to rewrite the outdated 1986 and illegal operating documents to comply with the Sterling Davis Act. This was a 3-year process with much outreach to and input from a very divided community. I care about how money is spent. Volunteerism is a huge part of how and why the Sea Ranch works. I've given considerable time to volunteer work. Women in Need was a special project for me. I curated and provided artworks for the rooms of the Women in Need House in Manhattan. This is a safe place for women and children who were driven from their homes by violence and fire. I experienced firsthand that art could heal. New York would not be a very habitable place without Central Park. I donated 3 years to the Central Park Conservancy, commissioning artists to create works of art which were sold to fund the maintenance of the park. We had major collaborators such as Target stores, Sotheby's and Christie's, and 25 local New York City galleries. I tried to find creative solutions to fundraising. I initiated and developed highly successful online benefit auctions to benefit the Coalition for the Homeless, AmFAR AIDS Research in the Dallas Museum, New York Academy of Art, Independent Curators International, and the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York. These are some of my top concerns and issues, and some ways in which I believe I can make a valuable contribution. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for taking your time today. I'd like to talk about myself a little bit, as queasy as it makes me feel, to talk about the 4 cornerstones of Sea Ranch, and then to mention a few things that I see coming up in the future. In 1985, my wife and I honeymooned here because we think it's the most beautiful place we know of. And every year since then, we'd come up and we would rent a house for a week. Kids, we bring them up and rent houses near the recreation centers. And 3 years ago, Lynn turned to me and said, "It's time, we gotta pull the trigger, we're not getting any younger." And we bought a house on the meadow, sort of near One-Eyed Jack's, and we've been coming up 10 to 15 days a month. We're part-timers, and we love it. We drive up from San Rafael, and And every time we drive through Petaluma and through Two Rock and through Valley Ford and all at Bodega, we see something new. And as we go from the freeway that's crowded to Petaluma that's you know, or suburban into the agricultural area, the closer we get to Sea Ranch, the better it gets. And we're always a little sorry when we go home on Sunday mornings, and we feel really privileged to be here. So we've been part-timers, and then a year ago, we bought a rental house that we have on the rental market, and we need that rental income to make it work, but it's also nice because our adult daughters come up and visit more often, and you know how that is. When I got up here, I ran into Debbie Tyler, and she suggested I get involved, and I've been involved in the utility committee, and a year ago or so, I became the chairman. I'm really proud of everything the utility committee did, the 900,000 gallon storage tank and a lot of other things, and I'm not entitled to any of the credit for any of that because I wasn't here when those things were done. But I did do one thing, and that is when our wonderful chairman, Rolly Combs, retired, I volunteered. And I've been having a lot of fun on that committee ever since. About a year ago, Mary Allender, the Vision Committee, asked me to join that committee, and they're a wonderful group of people that are there to spread the word, to help spread the word about what Sea Ranch is about. You know, we have about a 7% turnover every year, and when you do the numbers, you realize, wow, you know, through people moving and passing on, so to speak, we've got to pass on the values that have made it as good as it is. The cornerstones I'd like to talk about, and there are four. One is this beautiful land, and I cannot express how beautiful it is. We all know that, or we wouldn't be here. The second cornerstone are our governing documents that have kept it the way it is. The third cornerstone is the spirit of volunteerism, the incredible number of all of you who come to these things, who sit on committees, who've been on the board, who've done 100, 1,000, put in thousands of hours. We couldn't be the community that we are without volunteerism. And then the fourth thing is our incredible staff, from Frank Bell to all the department heads. They are courteous, and they are dedicated, and they are friendly, and they are wonderful to deal with. And I'm constantly excited and grateful for our staff. I've met with every department head to get to know what is going on in their worlds, and I've gotten to know individual staff members. And the same is true of the water company. I'd like to talk a little bit about the future, what I see coming up in the next 3 years. We're gonna continue to deal with dead and dying trees. That's just our new reality. And we're listening to scientists tell us what the causes are. I don't know if there will ever be cures. I think we're going to be spending more and more of our resources on taking down dead trees and chopping them up. And that's just the way it's going to be. The interesting thing will be what we decide to do to replace those trees. What species we use, whether we replace trees. It's going to be some change. Our water company, Randy Burke was our director of waterworks for over 10 years, and he retired, and we have a terrific new director from within the department, Eric Schatz. I'm really excited about that. You know, we're going to have pickleball courts. I think Leigh Mueller said that's the only way we get so many people in this room is when it has to do with pickleball. And it's going to be right over there, right at Del Mar Center. And they're going before, I believe, the design committee now. The solar array task force, we're going to be building a huge solar array to generate electricity for Sea Ranch operations so we don't rely on fossil fuels. And We've already spent the money for the engineering, and we're not going to be coming out of pocket, I think, for any more of it. So I think that's a great development. Probably it's going to be, it's not decided, but it'll probably be up near the airport. The lodge. So we have new owners of the lodge. I've had coffee twice with the owner's representative of the lodge, a nice Irishman named Dennis Collison. And I'm really impressed with them. I don't have any exciting news. I know that they're going to do a little remodeling of the lodge before the post office moves back. So there'll be a little remodeling in that space, and then the post office is definitely going to go back there. And then, according to Dennis, in 3 or 4 months, the restaurant's going to reopen. I have no idea what they're looking at for the lodge itself. I know they met with the design committee, but the message I want to pass along to you all is how impressed I am with their spirit of partnership. They bought here because they love Sea Ranch. They didn't buy here because they're lodge operators. They've never operated a lodge. You know, they fell in love with this place as we did. And I think they're going to be good partners with us. And I'm optimistic about the future. Well, that's what I got to say. And I'll wrap it up in a few minutes. Thank you.
I was going back to the post office today, and getting out of my car, I heard the honking, high honking. So I ran out into my meadow so I could see. There were about 100 geese flying overhead. It's like, God, I love this place. So amazing. So I've served here for 3 years on the board of directors. I was watching Blue Bloods last night. And the commissioner, the police commissioner, says to his sort of underperforming son, and there's a quote from, sort of a paraphrase or a quote from Luke, "To whom much is given, much is asked." And it's like, why do I want to run for the board? I mean, people are going, aren't you done? And I realized that I have been given almost 50 years on this ranch. I've been given the chance to watch my parents age and take a powerful stand. They were some of the pioneers of this ranch and fought long and hard, first of all, to get an association, and then to make this ranch work. And then since the year 2000, I've been living up here full time, which is just another huge gift that I've been given. And it's a gift of being close to nature. It's a gift of being in a rich cultural community. I mean, I think about living in Berkeley, and it's like, oh yeah, living in Berkeley around all that culture, but you never go anywhere, you know, because you're sort of tired and exhausted and hiding out in your apartment. It's like, up here, I'm in all these plays, doing all these things, and a lot of arts, and it's just like, I've been given so much here that the chance to give back another 3 years of my life is like, it's a gift to be able to do that. It's a gift to be able to give back to a place that has given so much to me. So I've been the chair of the vegetation committee, I've been on the board, I've been on the forest committee, which is the board committee that oversees the forest task force. I've been on the forest task force. Guess who lives in the forest? Obviously, there's a lot of forest-centered work here. One of the things that I did in order to get ready for this particular talk is I put out a call on the listserv to people who weren't going to be here to send me questions that they might have. And just that makes it easier. So I'm going to read some of those and then respond to them. Okay. The new nuisance rule seems pointed at controlling people who have short-term rentals on the ranch. I need income from renting my house in order to be able to have a place up here. What will you do to protect my ability to rent it out? The Sea Ranch was founded as a second home community. Rentals have been integral to the history, to the core foundation of this ranch. There are many people that started out as renters and ended up as owners up here. And there are many people that wouldn't have a chance to be able to live up here, since after the Bain bill, the house prices started rising dramatically, if it were not for the rentals. So I am going to be extremely cautious, and that's just putting it mildly, around any rule that specifically points to something renters need to do other than just the general management. I mean, I think the nuisance rule applied to the general management, applied to all people on the ranch, seems fair and equitable. But I'm going to be very cautious of anything that is focused on singling out the renter community in any kind of pernicious way. Where do you stand? Well, hold on a second, let me turn the page. How are you going to support the new owners of the lodge, if you are, and why? It's like, we've had a tough time with owners of the lodge. And speaking as a board member, and of course I can't speak too much about it, but we have done our best to create a viable relationship with owners of the lodge without much coming the other direction. And we're thrilled at the new owners of the lodge. I mean, it's exactly as Neil was talking about. We couldn't be happier with the people that are owning the lodge. It's an iconic emblem of the Sea Ranch, of what the Sea Ranch is about. And also, it's a feeder to the rental program, and it's a feeder to new members coming onto the ranch. So I'm going to do everything I can to support them in doing what they need to do from my position on the board. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to let them put up a McDonald's. Nobody here is. But I think that we're thrilled at this new opportunity to be able to create a working relationship with the lodge, and to be able to maybe repair some of the things that need to be repaired on land that has been controlled by the lodge up until now. What's happening with the pickleball courts, and why is it taking so long? Well, I kind of sympathize with Frank. I know he kind of did an end run when he presented the pickleball courts sort of fait accompli to the budget committee. And I was one of the ones that opposed that, because I thought it should go through planning, go through our rules and regulations. But I do sympathize with that desire to put an end run, because it seems like it takes forever when we actually go through all the things that we need to go through. I've always been a strong advocate for separate courts for the pickleball community, and that those courts get built. And I'm glad to see that we're sort of almost at the end of all of the delay. I think when the world dries out, we're going to be able to start to work on those courts. And I support them because it supports recreation for all ages. And I think aging in place is definitely an important issue that we have to deal with on the ranch. And pickleball allows us to be able to be out there and get beaten by Dr. Boki. Oh, okay. This one didn't come from the listserv, but it came after our town hall meeting that Karen and I ran to find out what the members actually wanted. And after that meeting, Bonnie pulled me aside and talked to me for a while, and I very much was in alignment with what she said, which is that she did not want a board that micromanaged the association. And I couldn't agree more. Our role as a board is circumscribed. We are here to hire a community manager. We're here to oversee the work of the community manager. We're here to do long-range planning, but we are not here to get involved into day-by-day, minute-by-minute operation of things that happen on the ranch. That's the job of the association staff that are highly competent, and the job of the community manager. It's not our job. And that's tough, because we're also here to represent the members. And members come to us with problems that they have. And negotiating that fine line between doing our proper due diligence as a board and also serving the membership is tricky. And all I can say is I try to do my best for it. But I also am one of those people that take a really strong stand for keeping us within the guidelines of Davis Sterling and not going beyond it. What am I most proud of as a board member? It's not the Forest Task Force, so I'm incredibly proud of the Forest Task Force. Those citizen scientists are out there doing so much incredible reading, and I'm one of them. And tromping through the forest and making observations and trying to come up with the best recommendations to the board. And it's not the way that I've served as a chair of Vegetation Committee, though I'm really proud of where we're going with the Vegetation Committee. We're creating our own governance documents, and I think that we are really going to be able to co-create with Frank a viable oversight function for the Vegetation Committee in terms of all the vegetation work that's done on the ranch. But what I'm most proud of is how the board has changed and evolved since before I came into it. Because before I came into it, things were a little warm around here. It was the middle of the NTMP fight, and I had many opportunities to address the board, and I would be standing over there talking into a microphone, and no one would look at me. They would all be looking down, and it would feel like they don't care what I'm saying. They could care less what I'm trying to say to them, even though I was incredibly passionate about it and had good things to say. And these days in board meetings, members come up and talk, and the board really listens, and the board changes their minds. I mean, one of the great examples is Jackie presented this proposal. We were talking about it. Somebody from the audience came up and made a few comments, and Jackie said, "It's really clear. I'm not clear with this proposal. I'm withdrawing it because it doesn't make any sense at this point." So that's the kind of deep level of intimacy and communication that I think makes this board really great. I am so proud of who we are, how we listen to each other, how we listen to each other in executive meetings, how we listen to each other in open sessions, how we communicate with each other across the board. I hope I get the chance to serve another 3 years, but I can assure you, you have an incredibly highly functioning board that it's been an honor to serve for the last 3 years. Thank you.
Well, that was a nice bit of pleasure to listen to 3 motivated candidates talking about their thoughts on the future and board work and volunteerism. At this point, we're going to open this up to questions. Couple of things I'd like to mention about doing that. First of all, the microphone. This is being recorded, and the microphone over there is for questions. So if you have a question, please go up to the microphone and use it. Some folks, like me, have hearing aids, and some folks have very soft voices, and no matter what I say, they whisper. And because they're a little nervous, I'm sorry, but it would really help if you do that. The other thing, please confine your question with any prefatory remarks to less than 2 minutes. Sometimes we get a long comment followed by, "Don't you agree?" I'm looking for a little more than that in the way of a question, but please do feel free and comfortable. These folks are here to answer your questions. We have a really good turnout today, and so I'm hoping some of you actually have some questions. We'll take questions now, and we'll take a break at 4, come back for more questions, and eventually some coffee and cookies, and a chance to meet personally and shake a hand. So with that, questions please.
Marty Campbell, 1715. This question is for David, and then comments from the other 2 candidates. David, you mentioned in your first statement that you thought we were spending too much money and we should learn to say no. And I've attended almost all the budget meetings for the last 2 decades. And I don't remember you ever bringing this issue up in a board meeting related to the budget. And you voted in favor of the significant increases in the budget 2 years ago, and then you voted in favor of the budget this year. So for the next fiscal year, so what would you envision that we not do in order to reduce the budget? And why did you make this a point in your current campaign? And then I'd like to hear from the other 2 candidates as well about their thoughts about the budget.
Sure, thank you, Marty. I'm glad I get to talk about the budget because I want to start off by saying I am really impressed with the fiscal management of this association. Every year when they do the budget presentation, I think it gets better and better. And at this point, I think the Finance Committee is taking a really active role in pre-planning their recommendations to the board as a whole. And so this year's Budget Committee process went very smoothly, and there weren't a lot of surprises in it. The things that concern me have to do with sort of an idea of what else can we do instead of just what's needed. And I look at expanding the offices. Like, to what degree do we expand the association offices? I don't think that where they are now, it's extremely awkward, but to what degree does that become a reasonable redesign, and to what degree that becomes a highly cost oriented expenditures? I would be careful of. I'll be watching that. I think what happened 2 years ago at the budget meeting when we got presented with a slew of different alternatives, none of which had been presented to the board, or some of which hadn't been presented to the board before, we were all kind of stunned. And I know that in that meeting, it was very difficult to say no because we hadn't even considered what the thing. I didn't even know what pickleball was at that point. We hadn't even considered some of the things that were being tossed out and asked for us to get a yes on that workshop so that we go in and establish a budget. I think Frank learned a lot from that meeting, and that won't ever happen again. I think he's really now working with the Finance Committee to make sure that there's a really appropriate process for presenting that workshop to the board. So I don't know if that answers your question well enough, Marty, but that's my answer.
I think the budget process works very well. I attended the Finance Committee meeting where the 2018-2019 budget was discussed. There were no surprises in it. Every one of those items was fully discussed. The pickleball courts, money for a new website, money for the engineering for a study of the solar array task force, some money to look at the feasibility of improving the association offices. And at the end of the process, the Finance Committee recommended a very large increase in the monthly assessment to $230. And as painful as it is, I was in favor of it, and the board passed it. This year it's gone down to going to go down this next year to 223, I've forgotten exactly, and that's as it should be. But I think the process works, and I'm not going to be the kind of candidate that says I'm going to say no when I don't even know what's coming up. If a new item comes up, I'll look at it on its merits, that's all. Thank you.
Well, I don't consider myself entirely fully informed about the finances of Sea Ranch yet. I did go to one budget meeting, and I know how to read those documents, and it looked well fleshed out. I would just say that as a general point, and I mentioned it earlier, I kind of come from another way of looking at it in the sense that I think a lot more discussion needs to take place about a particular project before it gets put down on paper in terms of dollars and cents. Somehow, it sometimes feels like the tail is wagging the dog. And I think a lot more maybe upfront information about a project could be helpful before putting a budget together. But I have to plead a little bit out of the loop because I'm new to the budget side of things. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else come forward? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Fisher, and I have two questions. One is more general, and one is a little more specific. I was curious to hear from all three of you about whether you consider Sea Ranch's relationship with the surrounding community, Walla, Anchor Bay, Point Arena, and south of us, as satisfactory, or do you see ways in which that relationship could be tightened and deepened? I think it's Sea Ranchers take advantage of a lot of the services that are offered in Walla and Points North, from the health clinic, our CMS, to churches. We have school children who live at Sea Ranch and who are bused to schools at Point Arena every day, but I don't see a lot of recognition and acknowledgement of that relationship. And I'd like to see it be more reciprocal, and curious to hear what your thoughts are about that. And more specifically, I was wondering if you would consider or support a proposal to take a look at ways in which we could open up one or more of our pools under very strict regulations to the community. We currently allow school children to come to the Olson Center for 2 weeks every summer to learn how to swim. But they have no other opportunity to practice swimming, and I sometimes worry that it's almost more dangerous that they think they know how to swim when they have no opportunity to practice swimming. There's 650 children who live on the 30-mile coastline between Stewart's Point and Manchester, and they have no access to a swimming pool. I think if the RCMS, the health clinic, and other health providers around town would also be really interested in having an opportunity to send patients to the pools for fitness work. Thank you.
I just want to, I'll start if that's okay. So during our town hall, one of the things that came up several times was the question of outreach to a larger community, and it's something that concerns me because I have heard it said to me, oh, you know, those Sea Ranchers, they don't really care about people who live outside their community. So there's a perception in Walla on the part of some. So yes, I think, thank God for the Arts Center, because I think that's one place where it seems that there's a nice relationship between Sea Ranch and the larger community. So I agree with you. I would like to see much more interaction in the local community. In terms of the school children, to me that's a good suggestion and something worth investigating. My husband teaches at the Kashaya School, for instance, and those kids have very little access to anything really. And one of the outcomes when I sat next to the curator from SF MoMA after their presentation here, and I said, how could we go back to something that was part of the original spirit of Sea Ranch? And she said, connect with the Kashaya Indian Reservation. And we have some personal experience of that. It's a difficult situation, but there could be some wonderful opportunities there for Sea Ranch to connect to the reservation.
Thank you, Mary. That's a fair question. How do we feel generally about interacting? I don't have any specific thought on how to better interact with the greater community. As far as opening up the pools, I would be very careful about that. I would survey the members of our association who use the pools and see what they think. Maybe present a proposal, children from the area use it between these hours and those hours on these days. And what would you think about it? And before I would just open it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just toss out something, which is like, we have a lot of elders in this community. Karen was saying, oh my God, look at all the people with white hair. It's like, and part of being an elder has to do with figuring out what our legacy is going to be. I know that when the Sea Ranch was first conceived, some of the early people talking about what this concept might mean was also talking about how to integrate it into the larger community. And I think we've kind of gone through a self-absorbed phase as we had to go through all the things that directly impacted the Sea Ranch, like the Vying bill and like dealing with the employee housing, Burbank housing, that whole situation that came up. We had a lot that we sort of had to focus in ourselves. And we were just saying, it's a pretty quiet time. It is a pretty quiet time. And it's actually a time when some of us that do have some extra time to spend can look beyond the boundaries of the ranch and see what is available and how we could support folks. And I know, like, I have neighbors where I live that have taught in some of the local schools, and so there is that interaction, but it's on a one-to-one basis. I think it'd be really great if we could expand it a little bit on a group basis, and that might be the next thing that we need to sort of take on, to take the vision that's inspired the Sea Ranch and bring it out into the wider world.
Good afternoon, my name is Tony Aguirre, and when we first purchased our home here at Sea Ranch, we had 24/7 security, and I'm hoping that that can be reinstated again beyond the 10 p.m. hour. I think there have been some instances of break-ins on the ranch, and having just a van go through from one end to the other make have the thieves or whoever deflect them. And I wouldn't really like to have the security come back at 24/7. Thank you.
Shall I start?
Wasn't exactly a question, but I think you're free to comment. Go ahead.
Well, that's a fair question. Remember asking. Yeah, I understand. Well, it's a money issue, and if the members of our association want a higher monthly assessment for greater services, we can do that. I would try and get some kind of survey going to find out.
I don't think a higher assessment is that. I think the ranch can well afford to pay two individuals to run midnight to 6 shift. With the income that we have.
Well, anyway, that's my thought. And I think it was a fair question for Tony to ask.
Thank you.
I know that our budget is very large, and so if you just look at the bottom line figures, you go, my God, we're rolling in money. But the truth of the matter is that money is very carefully all allocated out to projects that members have wanted. Now, I hear an upwelling from the membership saying that they want 24/7 community security. I would be more than happy to toss that out and represent that to the board. I just want to make sure it's something that's really coming from a majority or at least a large minority of the membership, not just from a few people. The statistics that we've generated so far don't show an urgent need for security at this time, but I'm definitely not against representing it if that's what you want. It's really up to you.
Next.
Bonnie Blake. Bonnie Blake, 34C11. At the town hall last week, one of the things that the candidates asked the people, which is very interesting, is what would you change at Sea Ranch? And great question. And so I would like to turn that question around and ask the candidates, what would you change? And I have a guideline. I really don't want to hear answers like improve the design review process, keep the budget fiscally responsible, go after dead and dying trees, because those are generalities, and we all know. I would like to know if any of you have very specific changes that you would like to make at Sea Ranch. Thank you.
Bonnie, I do not.
I'm still thinking. Real specific changes. It's really a great question. There is something that I would like to see. Many years ago, I was on the Archives Committee. And there's something about the Archives Committee and the Vision Committee and the SF MoMA presentation. I know when we talk about redesign for the administration building, they talk about a space for presenting Sea Ranch history, and that excites me. I would really love to see like almost a museum, if that was possible. Take some of our facilities, or maybe some of the structures by the barn or someplace else, and really turn it into a museum that people could walk through to really see kind of what material was presented at SF MoMA and what the vision of Larry Halpern and the founders, Al Bulkey and the founders of this organization, this development created.
I think that's a great idea. So this is not so much something I would change, but maybe it would become a long-term change. So the aging population of the opera or the museum is a little bit similar to what we have here. And those institutions have worked actively to try to create the next, not so much the next generation, but an even younger generation than that. There are youth groups and youth committees that are part of museums and operas. There's an effort to bring younger people in. So I pose this question to people who own houses and who have kids, and I've said, so what about your kids? Oh, my kids don't care anything about this, but they will once they get left it in the will. So I have a thought, I don't know how to do it, but I just have a thought that there might be something around the idea of creating this next younger generation of people to become the stewards of Sea Ranch before they just end up with the property and don't know what to do next.
Thank you. Roland?
Thank you. I'm Roland Bush, 1340. A couple of years ago, we came very close as a community to logging the central redwood forest. And the board at that time wisely retreated to let's study it some more facilities. And as a result, the Forest Task Force has been doing careful and extended work on figuring out not just the condition and possibilities for the central redwood forest, but the forests all over Sea Ranch as they were judged by the board. I am particularly interested, however, in the redwood forest, because that was the target of the logging plan. And I am curious to know, since the Forest Task Force may very well pass the matter back to the board in the next year or two, what each of these candidates feels about, in particular, the condition and prospects of the central redwood forest here at Sea Ranch.
So this is a subject I'm intimate with. I had to do a lot of research during the timber harvest plan for the Santa Cruz Mountains. And I met with loggers, logging companies, I sat with Big Creek Lumber, I was toured around 2 or 3 recently logged forests as a kind of selling opportunity on the part of the timber company to show us what a beautiful forest looks like after it's timbered, and that we shouldn't worry. I listened to anybody, it seemed like anyone who spoke to us had a vested interest in logging the forest. And after all the reading I did and all the conversations and all the meetings, what I came away with was there was no sound reason to log a redwood forest except for money. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people are going to argue with me about that, and but you know, I've even spoken to Senator Virons about this. Although they are, as part of their plan near Davenport, they do plan to log a certain portion of it, but they're clear about the fact that they need to do that in order to pay for the maintenance of the rest of the 5,800 acres or whatever it is. But they really don't want to do it either. I don't see a redwood forest knows how to take care of itself. What we have a problem with is dead and dying trees that are bishop pines or not the redwoods.
I'm aware that there was a horrible political battle over this issue. I wasn't here then. I heard some inflammatory or very strong words in question, like targeting and things like that. I know that the people who were working on a timber plan were motivated by a desire to reduce fuel because it presents a health and safety issue. And with recent fires in the area, I'm still concerned about the fuel load and the understory plantings in the forest. I don't have a specific opinion on the CTPZ and what should be done, and I'll be very interested in what the recommendations are of the Forest Task Force. But my guiding concern will be human safety.
I've had a few opinions about this. I want to speak to what it's done to this community, because it's really harmed this community. I'm not blaming. I know the people on the board were well-meaning in their desire to address the issues around the forest, and also in their desire to generate, income for the association. I am not accusing anyone of being evil or wrong, even though they were 180 degrees from where I was. But what I want to address is the amount of pain and suffering that it caused many of us in the community and continues to cause many of us in the community. Not so much, I think, the people on the logging side, because I think the people on the logging side were following the advice of their experts, and there was a lot to be said for it. I mean, every time the logging trucks would run through the ranch, the association would make $100,000 to $200,000 according to Frank's estimate. That's a lot of money. And there were issues around how best to manage this forest. What do we do about thinning trees? What do we do about fire safety? So nobody was wrong, bad, or evil in this conversation, but I still wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning hurting, I mean physically hurting, because these trees are my neighbors. I walk through them every day. The wildlife runs through the meadow that's in my backyard. I know when we talk about habitat, it's not a scientific issue, it's a personal issue, because the foxes and the owl that landed outside of our house the other day to look at us as the sun was setting, and the geese flying overhead, and the amazing number of deer that managed to find their way into our house, not to mention turkeys. They are part of our responsibility too, because we signed that darn covenant that said we were going to hand this on to our fellow members and on to future generations. And to me, I'm not going to endanger the ranch, but I don't think the ranch is in any danger from the Central Forest. My father helped buy that forest from Travelers Insurance, and when that group bought it, they created a statement saying, we prohibit logging on the ranch. And they said it because they saw, and some of you here remember, what that land looked like after the loggers had gone through. Now, the NTMP that was presented was not as vicious as the plan that Travelers actually enacted. But the intention behind that prohibition, I think, is really important. And it's part of our covenant here on the land. So I do have an opinion about this. Thank you.
Go ahead, I was gonna stop at 4, but I wanna
Don't
let
really
you, since you've been
people
patient.
in their snacks, but my question is just quickly, my husband and I, and Judy Pennycook, have lived here. I bought our property 6 years ago, and I'm someone that I guess would be considered very risk adverse. And we had identified on our property and then on the adjacent property that is the association's a number of dead and dying pine trees. So it wasn't exactly in our budget that we got them down. When we asked if the association would take those trees down that were their responsibility, they said they would eventually, but it might be 3 years or more. The risk adverse part comes since I have 2 of our 5 grown children living in San Rosa, 2 who nearly lost their homes, 2 who were evacuated, 1 who's amazing, the house is still standing. And recognizing, as you've all talked about, the dead and dying trees, I'd like each of you to speak to a way that you see is important as far as prioritizing dead and dying trees and removal, at least on the association's property. We were able to defer the costs by doing a lot of the work ourselves, hauling a lot of it out of the area to the dump, but we're utilizing what would be hauled off. But I know a lot of people don't have that ability, and what could you say speaking to it? Because I see it as probably our greatest risk here at the ranch.
In my mind, and I think in the mind of many board members, so I won't speak for them, I can only speak for me, it's the most important issue that we're facing. And it's not a contentious issue, it's a real issue. We are trying to develop 2 things. One is a way of assessing an ongoing assessment of tree health and tree life so that we can be a little bit proactive in this, not just removing the trees once they're dead, but deciding which ones that are still alive but maybe diseased need to be removed and which ones are going to turn out to be resistant to this disease and continue to live. The second thing is that we've already created guidelines and we're in the process of learning how to implement them so that when we get to the point of tree removal, we do it with the least damage to the habitat. So you bet it's an important problem. As far as I'm concerned, it's number 1 on my list.
I agree. We have personal experience of exactly what you're talking about. I couldn't understand why it was so hard to say to the community, the tree is dead, we need to take it down. And they told us we had to call an arborist to verify it was dead. So I think the process is faulty for dealing with taking trees down, and I'm glad to hear there's some way of, or move afoot to identify which areas are best to cover, but it's a real problem, and that's why I say that in terms of the redwood forest can take care of itself. It's a damp environment back there. This forest out here, that's a whole other conversation, and that's the forest that we're at risk from, so it's top of my list too. Thanks.
Judy, if we need to spend more money and even pay more per month to have a bigger budget for removal of dead and dying trees, then I'll vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, a little later than I thought, we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back to hear any further questions that you think of. Okay, thank you, folks. We'll resume with the questions. So could someone come up?
Hi, I'm Anne Brennan. I do get stage fright. John and I live in 1315. I just figured out how to do that. We've been here for a couple of years. We've been in the area 18 years, and we live in both Timber Cove and Sea Ranch. John is the water board vice president in Timber Cove, and he's a volunteer firefighter. I've been on the board of the Timber Cove Association and heavily involved in our community. My question is for Mr. Moran. In your candidate statement, you say, part of my practice is serving as a paid mediator, settling others' lawsuits. Interpersonal skills, like genuinely listening to the other person's perspective, go a long way to making peace and saving legal fees. I would bring the same dispute resolution skills to the board. John and I belong to two HOAs, Sea Ranch and Timber Cove. Both are extremely beautiful. Just in the last year, you have represented clients in two cases against the Timber Cove Homeowners Association and community, and private individuals in the community. You are representing wealthy private individuals who have repeatedly rebuffed prior attempts to mediate the situation and are targeting middle-class members with less means to force the capitulation rather than work with the Timber Cove Homeowners Association on a non-litigious resolution. John and I are forced to deal with this here. We are some of the people on the receiving end of the lawsuits. And in Sea Ranch, because you are asking us to vote for you. How do the lawsuits that you've pressed against Timber Cove Homes Association members square with your commitment to make peace and save legal fees? Why don't you actually work with the board?
Well, as Ann may have implied, but I'll tell you, there's a lawsuit, and I represent some people in Timber Cove who are suing to preserve their trails, and we believe certain people in Timber Cove have cut down trees, put them in the trails so that they couldn't use the trails. And so I can't talk about in front of an adverse party about a lawsuit without a lawyer present. So I really can't talk about the particulars, but that's the best I can do for you. I can't talk about a lawsuit where the other client is here and the lawyer isn't. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Don Krieger, 35E83. Over the last few years, I've heard from several people on the ranch about inconsistencies, either at the DCEM or at the design review. And I just wanted to get your thoughts as to whether you've heard those same type of things, whether they could be improved, or everything's just going along swimmingly. And one more question, so I won't bore everybody. We've heard obviously a major discussion regarding dead and dying trees, and replacing where we need to replace those trees. At the same time, I also, since we've been here a few years, have seen where friends of ours who have homes have lost their views. They can no longer see the horizon, they can't see the sunsets because these are trees on the commons for the most part. And whether that's a concern, an issue, there you go. Anybody can answer, or all. Thank you.
Well, I'll answer the first one and then let other people, other candidates answer. With respect to the design review process, I can say this, that there's a member of the Utilities Committee, he and his wife own a lot, and they just submitted their plans, and they've been working with the design committee and design review staff for 6 months, and they're very, very happy with the process and the outcome. They submitted a whole set of plans, and they were asked, they had 5 clear-story windows that would show on the road, and they were asked to reduce the number to, I forget, it was 3 or 2, and they thought it was very reasonable, and they're doing that. The particulars are not important, but what impressed me was how fair they thought the process was and how reasonable the design change that they were requested to make. So that's been the feedback that I've had. Thank you.
So I mentioned that in my statement. We've had personal experience with the Design Review Committee. We believe in what they do. It's the right thing to do. However, I'm in the belief that the process could be easier for everybody and more efficient. It takes a very long time to get through that process. And I think to get, to have a garage approved, but it takes a year seems like something could be done about that. In terms of their involvement in the design, we have also experienced that some of their suggestions have been helpful and made a better design. So that's the best side of what they do. On the other hand, they've weighed in on how we should do things on the inside of our house, which is not acceptable. So I think that, like anything, there are things that could be improved and ways to do that and ways to make the process easier and more streamlined maybe for the public. In terms of the views, we've also encountered that one too. So yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I think I'd be very upset if I bought a house with a fantastic view and suddenly it went away, but I don't quite know how to answer that question.
There you can see how eager we are to answer that question. And I think it's like, that's the kind of question that brings us right square to the middle of the gray zone, which is where life gets dealt with and legislation gets dealt with here on the Sea Ranch, which is, there are times when the design committee is absolutely brilliant, and there are times when they're significantly less than brilliant. I mean, I like this particular crew, they're really great, they're not building some of those horrible boxes that earlier design committees approved, and you walk around going, how did that ever get through design review? I don't know. But on the other hand, some people love what the help they get from the design committee, some people have a lot of struggles with it. Some people I for one appreciate the job that Lisa's doing in DCEM to enforce those, but every time something gets enforced, there's an angry owner, so that's a thankless job. And sometimes it's not done skillfully, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it can't be done skillfully because it ends up in an executive meeting of the board, where we have to review it, decide where we go from there. It's a nasty business, is what it is. Because we have such an incredibly rigorous design process, we have an incredibly beautiful development. And there isn't a person that I know that would want to get, well, I'm sure there's some member somewhere who would want to get rid of it, but there's nobody I know that I respect that would want to get rid of the design process. And it's going to be clunky and cumbersome, and people's feelings are going to get hurt. And I think it probably could be better, and I sure can't point out how right now.
I just wanted to add two things. One is that I also agree that there are inconsistencies that are sort of incomprehensible. So it seems like that's an area that could be straightened out. And the other suggestion I have, having gone through the process and in the middle of it right now, is that there's a lot of local knowledge that, and I don't know if this is true or false, but it's a feeling I have, that the members of that committee cannot take into consideration in the way, for instance, if there was a local architect member of that board who could obviously recuse themselves on anything that directly relates to them, but at least has a really full understanding of what the design requirements are here. They have a full understanding of how difficult it is to get contractors and skilled workers to work here. It isn't just like, let's call up Santa Rosa and have a plumber come up or an electrician. I mean, there are a limited number of resources here. And when you're doing a big building project, you need to have collaboration between the review process team, the design team, the architects on the job, the contractors. And I feel like that's a missing part of the committee is this, I think they used to have them actually, that there were local architects on the committee, but it feels like that's something that ought to come back.
Thank you. Bonnie, before we take the next question, one of the folks in the rear said perhaps when you answer your question, you could state your name and maybe just raise your hand once so they can see you're Neil on the far end and you're David on this end, and we have no doubt Karen's in the middle. So if you could do that just once, I'd appreciate it on this set of answers.
Bonnie Playhouse again. One of the really interesting things that happened in the last year was the formation, after a great deal of work by Supervisor Linda Hopkins, of the Sonoma County Coast Municipal Advisory Council. And one of the remarkable things about this is that despite a lot of outreach and a lot of communication, there was very little interest in this by Sea Ranch. And it was hard to get representatives. We do have good representatives, but nobody seemed interested. And the municipal, and a lot of you may be familiar with the Walla Municipal Advisory Council, which has been around for many years and has done tremendous things. Really been involved in the streetscape and underground wires and all that stuff. So anyway, going forward, do you think the board or the association could or should help facilitate in some way Sea Ranch's participation in the MAC, and how would you do that?
Well, I think our representatives of that board are some of the most experienced sea ranchers that exist on the face of the earth. So I'm really happy with the representation we have on it.
And that was David.
Oh, that was David.
Other comments? Okay.
Maggie Crosby, 34A, 67. My question is about access around Sea Ranch for people with disabilities. It's now been 30 years since the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I was taken aback to learn that the association offices have no accessible restroom. It's probably legal because we haven't modified those offices, but it's not ethical. In fact, it's downright bizarre given the age of our population that we seem so indifferent. One of the issues that floats in and out of consciousness, if you remember, is this barrier-free trail so that people in wheelchairs can see the harbor seals pupping. And here we are coming up once again. I've heard about this for years, and once again we're about in puppy season, and there still isn't a trail that would allow people in wheelchairs to go see them. So my question just in general is, is this something you think about? Is this something you care about? And if so, how should Sea Ranch in a more systematic way begin to address the barriers of this land? And let me say that the Olson, the pool here is accessible. And it's terrific, and access to water is very important for people with disabilities like Franklin Roosevelt. And that was our, it was a recent construction, and so we had to comply with the ADA, and we did. But I don't think we should shrug our shoulders and say, well, we complied with that. It's really time that this civil rights issue gets a little attention.
Yeah, I'll take it on. I couldn't agree more. I think, in a way, it speaks to an even broader issue around diversity. It's like, how do we allow for all the different special populations on the ranch to be heard and appreciated and serviced? And I would like to see us be more proactive as an association, not just kind of like responsive to what we think might be a need when members come forward and say we want a barrier-free trail, but really sort of do some consulting with experts in the field and find out, have somebody go through the ranch and consult with the association staff and with board members to see how we can make this entire development more accessible for people with disabilities. So I think it's an important issue. I'd love to see us make more progress on it, and I'd love to see the progress not be so reluctant, but really to embrace this issue.
I think it's an important area. My concern is how to find out what people want and what they think. And maybe, someone suggested, I think Don suggested using info alerts to perhaps be able to send out a survey to people asking questions. It feels that we need a greater proximity to the Sea Ranch group as a whole to be able to understand what people want and what they don't want. And so I think we ought to think about ways to do that efficiently.
Neil Moran speaking. I think realistically, Maggie, we're going to need squeaky wheel people who are passionate about this, who are willing to put in the time to get the board or the appropriate committee to address it. I know that the Barrier-Free Trail Project has been in the works for 5 years, and I know that we're now testing 2 different trail surfaces. So thank goodness that project is in the final stages, but I don't have a magic wand to evaluate the ranch to see what we need to do to make it more accessible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And these are going to be the last 2 questions because I need to reserve some time for the concluding remarks of our 3 candidates. So if you could come forward and state your question.
Linda Knable, Unit 2884. I didn't intend to speak about this, but because of the last speaker, barrier-free trails, there's one thing I would like to mention. I've been a seal docent practically since the program started. And there was somebody just this past week who was in a motorized vehicle of some sort with a flag at the back, and she went down to the seal rookery, and the seals immediately scattered into the water. The idea of a barrier-free trail sounds very good, but it really does have some pitfalls that need to be thought of very, very carefully. Because if we do have that happen, we're not going to have a seal rookery there. What I really came up to talk about, though, was my concern about the trails. We walk the Bluff Trail most of the time, and some parts of it are in terrible condition. There is one near the access to, if you're in the center of Walk-On Beach, and you take a left, where the trail is so wet, so slippery, so muddy, that people have created 2 new trails, one going very close to the cliff edge and one going practically onto private property. That is not just because of this year and the water that we've had. It has been going on for years. I think that really has to be addressed. The other concern I have is that there's been a lot of erosion on the cliffs, and there are places where I think we really are going to have to think about putting up some fences before we have people going over the cliff. I don't know if you want to address it, but I wanted to express those concerns.
If you want to make comments, please go ahead. You
I
can.
agree.
And also, we're constrained by governmental agencies about how much we can actually do in terms of bluff restoration or preventing bluff erosion. But we're not constrained in terms of what we can, with the materials we can use to build our trails. And I think that particular trail you're talking about and some of the other ones, we can really reconsider using gravel, going back to using gravel on some of those trails instead of maintaining the way that we're doing it, or taking a whole nother look at the whole drainage issue around those particular areas in order to make that trail more viable. And it's something that we're aware of. It's not, it's not something that's being ignored. But again, whoever said squeaky wheels, I just really want to assure you, this is a board where squeaky wheels really work. So for God's sake, send letters to the board. We read them, we pay attention to them, we talk about them. So they aren't wasted time and energy. A lot of times people complain, they have a lot of issues, they're concerned about stuff, they talk amongst each other. We have no idea that's going on until somebody actually writes a letter, or 5 of you write a letter about the same issue. Don't feel free, reproduce it a lot, just find new words. If 4 people come to us with the same issue, something's going to happen around it. So we do listen.
Neil Moran, I agree with what has been said. I don't want to take your time with my repetition of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Well, Smith, Unit 28, Lot 102. I want to be sure, I have 2 questions. Number 1, are you all ready to spend money to cut the trees down that are dead? Yes or no? Neil?
Yes.
Karen?
We're spending $200,000 in the next budget, and we have that as an open item. It may continue or it may get bigger.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it was shifted away from roads, right?
Last year, the last budget, it was shifted away from the roads. This year, it was included in the regular budget.
Okay, so we won't be robbing Peter to pay Paul?
We will not. We will be doing a road slurry program this year.
In terms of communication, I'm on the communication committee, and we're going to have a new website, which I'm looking forward to. However, I think we're missing the boat by not using a Facebook page or Twitter. Lots of people don't like them, but they are the most effective means. I just spoke with a woman that runs a website with over 3,000 members. They don't put things on their website anymore. They go out and put them on Facebook.
You're singing my song, and I'm getting nowhere with it. I think they ridicule me on the board for how many times I say, but we really should have a presence on Facebook. So I'm with
That's
you
okay. I get made fun of in the communication committee too. But you notice I'm not giving up. So it's just something to think about. It's an alternate message.
Right. The board's changing, so who knows? Maybe that'll happen.
Any other comments from the candidates? Okay, thank you very much, and that will conclude our questions. So now we're going to give each candidate a couple of minutes to sort of make final remarks, and I will shut up and let somebody else come up here.
So, what is my governing style? I'm fair, I'm responsive, I'm respectful, I'm curious, I'm methodical in my research in order to understand the issue or the subject. You cannot make good, sound, lasting decisions without being fully informed. The number 1 rule of piloting prior to takeoff, according to my husband, is that you have to have all available information. I think that's a good way for us to fly too. I look for creative solutions, always. Michio Kaku, the American theoretical physicist and futurist, was asked if the IQ test was a measure of human intelligence. He responded that his measure of intelligence was how far someone was able to think out into the future. So in all the decisions we make as a board or as a community, we need to be able to think the issue as far out into the future as possible. What will the implications be? Vision is not just what we see with our eyes, but also what we can see with our imagination. I bring both creative expertise and business expertise. I'm an arts professional and I've owned my own business since 1985. I'm also a practicing artist. I've both started and run other people's businesses, and prior to starting my own, I began serving on committees and subcommittees for the Arts Council of Great Britain in London, a quasi-governmental organization. My job was to secure funds from the British Treasury for the advancement of the contemporary art in Great Britain. Can't see through the microphone. I've served almost consecutively between the years 1981 and 2015 on 3 OHA boards in New York and Redwood Meadows Ranch in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I'm a creative problem solver, a peacemaker between opposing points of view. I've tackled a multitude of difficult HOA community issues: water, marijuana farms, board member disputes, neighbor disputes. I'm not afraid to call out what's not working, seek to find viable solutions while always listening to the needs of the community. My friend Bob Hartstock sent me a wonderful quote. We're not sure where it originated, but it feels like it is in the spirit of who we should be as a community. Leadership is not about being the best. It's about making everybody else better. That's the kind of leader I would aspire to be. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. I'm pragmatic, plain spoken, honest. I know I can't please everyone, and I like working with people. And I'll bring those qualities to service on the board. I'd like both your votes. Thank you.
When I first came onto the board, I read the design manual, and I found in there a quote that has profoundly shifted the way that I saw my role here at Sea Ranch as a board member. And it's a quote from Larry Halpern, in which he talks about wanting to preserve the poetic and spiritual survival of the ranch. There's something about that phrase, the poetic and spiritual survival, that yes, I'm here to serve the membership. And yes, I'm here to do my fiduciary responsibility as a board member. And yes, I have to pay attention to the money that comes in and the money that goes out. I have to pay attention to security, to dead and dying trees, to pickleball courts, to whatever happens to come down the pike. But I also have to serve the poetic and spiritual survival of this community. And I also have to take a stand for the poetic and spiritual survival of this community when it's at odds with what's practical and expedient. So that's who I am. I'd love to have you vote. Thank you.
That concludes our forum for today. I would like to offer some recognition to Al Francis, who has stepped forward to do the video. Our longtime videographers, Nancy Custer, moved last week. So we'll miss them, but thank you, Al, very much appreciated. You're stepping forward. And with that, there's coffee. I'm dubious how many cookies are left, but.
May I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I think there's one more thing. Leigh Mueller has led these election forums for many years. And my understanding, Leigh, this is your last time that you will be stepping down. And I think we all just want to say thank you for your service.
With that, if we could get a little help on putting the chairs away. You knew that was coming, didn't you? And our candidates will meet and greet up here for a bit, and then that's where the coffee is, or where it is. Thank you very much.